Hello, welcome to this next Blender tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be modelling a little interior of a kind of warehouse industrial building. And the nice thing about this is a lot of them have very repeating architecture, which means we can model a small amount but multiply it out to get a much bigger space. So we're in a general scene and I'm just going to get rid of this default cube. So let's just select that and delete that out, and then I'm going to add back another cube and just get it set up. So I want to model a much bigger area, so I'm going to make it a 3 meter cube, and we'll just set the Z position to 1.5 meters, which is half of 3 meters, which will get it to sit on the ground plane. And then let's go to edit mode. I'm going to select our outside faces if I can get to the right selection spot, and then I'll press delete and select faces. There we go. So because this is an interior, we want all the normals pointing inwards. Currently they're pointing outwards because we created a cube, and you can see that if you go to the overlays here and select the display normals overlay, you can see these small green lines. They are kind of pointing outwards. That's the direction of the normal. That's the direction that render engines will render that polygon. Some will render both sides, but some don't, so I'm going to flip those. So let's press A to select all of our model, and then under mesh we'll go to normals and flip, and now they're pointing inwards, which is perfect. Okay, so that's our very basic shape. In the next section we're going to cut a window into this, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so let's cut a window in, and I've looked at a lot of references, and windows generally start about 3 feet off the ground. So I'm going to put a line in, and then we're going to move it to 3 feet above zero. So let's use our loop cut, and I'll pop that loop in, and then I'm going to select that. And now I want to move it down to 0, but there's an issue. Theoretically I should just be able to type 0 into the z-axis and it will move it to 0, but it's already 0. So what's going on? Well, that's because the center of this box, the origin, is in the middle, and I want it on the bottom. So let's just sort that out. So I'm going to go to object mode, and under object, whoops, sorry, I've got my camera overlay there. We want to apply our location, and now when I go back to edit mode and select that line, you'll see it's now at 1.5 because our origin has moved to the ground plane, which is perfect. So now I can just type in 0 and it's on the floor, and now I can press the G key to get my movement gizmo up, and I'm going to move it up. Let's make it 36 inches, 3 feet. Okay, so in addition to that, I want my window to be 60 inches at the top. So I'm going to put another cut in with loop slice. I'm going to move that down to 0, and I need to move it 36 inches up to get to there, another 60 up to get to there, so that's 96 inches. So if I press G and start moving it up, I could type in 96 inches and it will get to where I want it to be. So now I've got a window which is more or less in proportion with real life, because windows have some quite specific sizes and things. If you just look up windows dimensions and positions, you'll find a whole bunch of references that will tell you about that. Okay, so now I want to actually cut the window in. So let's put the verticals in. So I'm going to click loop cut and cut down the middle, and then I'm going to increase my number of cuts here to around 5. Now I'm not going to keep all these, it's just getting me an approximation. So let's go back to select mode and press the just click off to deselect. Then I'm going to alt click and then shift alt click on these two and the one down the middle, and then delete and dissolve those edges. And now I've got a size in here. So next then, you know, we've got the geometry to put our window in, but I want to check the size of the width and I want to adjust it, and we're going to use the measure tool to do that next. Okay, so what I want to do is find out how wide this is, and we can do that with this measure tool here. So I've got the measure tool selected, I've got snapping turned on and to vertex. Now if I left click and hold when I snap to the vertex there and then drag that across until it snaps to the other one and let go, it will measure that distance for me, and it's a meter, which is really close to what I want, but it's not exactly. And I know it's a bit fussy of me, but you know, I'm a bit like that. So what I want to do is resize this middle section to be 36 inches, which is really close to a meter, but it's not a meter, so you know, I'm going to do it anyway. And as far as I know, there's no kind of easy way of doing it in edit mode, but there is an easy way of doing it in object mode. So what I need to do is separate this into its own little object. So if I press the P key and then click by selection, we get a new option here, a new object. And if I slip back to edit mode, I can select that object, and now under the dimensions I can just type in 36 inches, and as you can see, it's really close, but no cigar. It's not right, so there you go, that's why I'm doing it. So what I need to do now is combine them back, and that's relatively straightforward. So I just shift click on the other object and press control, whoops, that's not control, that's control and J, and now I'm back into having a single object. And now if I go to back to edit mode and pick edges, I'm going to select over those edges that are facing each other, press space, type in bridge, and then bridge those over. And then we'll do the same on the other side. Let's make sure I've got everything. There we go. Press space. It's got my selection from last time in, so I can just hit bridge again. And now I just want to get rid of these superfluous lines here. So I've pressed Alt, click on one of them, and then Shift Alt click on the other. Press delete and dissolve those edges. There we go. So now this is 36 inches. And we can confirm that by going back to our measurement tool. You'll see we've got our measure there already, but it's measuring beyond that dimension. Whoops, I didn't hold down shift. If you want to delete a dimension, by the way, if you click on it and just hit delete, it will. It's pretty easy to do it one side. Whoops, there we go. It will get rid of it. There we go. So right click, left click and hold, and then drag that over. It's 91.44 meters, which happens to be 3 feet. Just my brain works between things. It's a product of an old, how can I put it, education system, I think. Okay, so now I've got a really precise thing, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm going to ruin that ever so slightly in the next one, which is odd, but never mind. Where we're going to actually cut the window in. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so now we're going to cut the window in, and I'm just going to demonstrate why I do a little inset here. So first of all, I'm just going to extrude and push that back a little, and there we go, we have a window. And now I would want to bevel these edges, because having that sharp edge there is not going to look good. But if I press Alt and click on there, it's not going to select all the way around, because the geometry flow doesn't know which way round I want to select. It could be anywhere. That's because I have essentially 4 edges at each vertex intersection. So if I do happen to manually select around here and then use bevel with Control and B and just click in to start it off, I'll give it a 2mm bevel and 2 rounding levels or 2 segments. That's okay, but it's actually deforming the mesh around it. These are no longer straight, and that bugs me. Plus, you know, I really don't like it. If it bugs me, that's no different, is it? So anyway, to get around the fact that it bugs me, I'm just going to undo what I've done. There we go. And instead of beveling in first, I'm going to put a tiny little inset in. So I'm just going to start that off, and then in the inset value I'll put, say, 2mm. So just a tiny little one. You can go bigger, you can go smaller, it doesn't really, you know, make much odds in this case. And then I'm going to inset that to about 8 inches. So -8 inches. And now if I go to my edge mode and press Alt and click on that edge going around there, it selects the whole thing because the polyflow is now correct. It knows which way to go. And if I Control B and click in, I'll give it a 2mm bevel with 2 segments, and I'm just going to zoom in and make sure that's not got quite to the end. It has. So I'm just going to make it a 1mm bevel. There we go. Don't want to have it interfere with those that bevel we put in the first place. So there we go. Now we have a window, and hopefully I've adequately explained why I put an inset in first. Next then we're actually going to form the window. So we're going to separate some geometry and then model our window in. So I will talk to you then. Okay, so now I want to form the window pane here, or the window frame. So first of all, I'm going to inset this one just a little bit, perhaps a couple of inches. So let's just type that in down here, 2 inches, and then we'll extrude that inwards or outwards depending upon your perspective, and that's -2 inches. There we go. So now what I want is to detach this, because I want to cut it, and if I cut it in place it's going to expand and add lots of geometry where I don't want it. So let's deal with that. So with it selected, just press the Y key and then the W key, sorry, not W, G for move, and then I'm just going to move it in an inch. So what's that, -1 inch. There we go. So now our potential glass pane is bang in the middle of our frame. But as I said, I do want to cut it. I do want to, give it some panes. So I'm going to press Alt H to hide everything else. Sorry, it's not Alt H, is it? It's Shift H, silly man. And then we're going to put some cuts in. So let's put a cut down the middle, and I want maybe 3 or 2 cuts down the front. There we go, and that's perfect. So if I want to put a little kind of framework in here, I can, of course, but for that I want to have another piece of geometry. So I'm going to go to face mode, whoops, and go to select, and I'll just press A to make sure everything's selected, and I'm going to press Y to duplicate again, and then Shift and H to get rid of anything that was in the background. So now in poly mode, I'm going to select each of our faces. Actually, yes, I'm going to select each of our faces and use inset, but when I bring that in, it's going to inset everything as a whole, and I want it to do it on only particular pieces, on each piece individually rather. So down here in our options for inset faces, I've got individual, and now if I make that perhaps 0.5 inches, that will give me a nice little frame. And now I can use my extrude to take that out, and I'm going to delete those faces because they're not going to be our windows. They're going to be, well, they're not going to be anything. That's the point. Okay, so now if I Alt H to unhide everything. Oh, I didn't manage to duplicate it. Never mind, that's not a problem. It's not a problem because I can just simply undo a couple of steps and then press Y and then G, and I'll move those forward a little bit. There we go. So Alt H to unhide everything else, and now I've got window panes, individuals, and I've got a frame, and I've got some an outer frame. So the last thing on this then is simply to bevel these. So I've pressed Alt to select that loop around there, and then Shift Alt click, Shift Alt click, Shift Alt click, going right round. I'm going to bevel each of these to give them a nice rounded edge. Not too rounded, just rounded enough so that it, you know, makes it look more pleasing. So Control B and then click. Let's make it 2 millimeters. There we go. Now we've got our pieces in. Lovely. So we've got a window, we've got a wall, we've got a floor and a ceiling, but we're going to need some other things. And let me turn this overlay off because I have a feeling it might be confusing. Yeah, so we need to add some materials in, we need to add some more detail in before we then multiply it out to get to where we want to. So we'll do, or we'll start that in the next one. Okay, so we're going to start with some beams now, and I'm just going to select these ceiling pieces here and move them upwards. So if I move those up, say let's call it 6 inches. I don't want to move it on X, don't know why that's in there. There we go. So 6 inches, there we go. So with that done, what I want to do is create a 6-inch beam over on this edge. So we'll do that by selecting this edge, and I'll extrude that down, and we want that to be 6 inches. So 6 inches, there we go. And now I want to detach it. So if I select that polygon and press the Y key, that will detach it, and now I can move it 3 inches inwards. So it's -3 inches. There we go. So now we can use our extrude tool and extrude it in this direction 6 inches. So -6 inches. There we go. So now I've got a square beam, which is, you know, pretty good. That's what we want. But I don't need the top or the small front and back polygons, so I'm going to delete those. And then we're going to just put a little bevel in. There we go. So select both those edges and Control B, and we'll click in, give it a value of about 3 millimeters, and that should be good. Lovely. Okay, so before I start to duplicate these out, I want to unwrap this. So let's select all of the polygons in this particular piece. So select one and hit L, and then we'll go over to UV editing. I'm going to press Shift H to hide everything else, and then in the 2D view I'm going to hit A, and then we'll hit U and unwrap. Now we've got an unwrapped beam. Excellent. And that's because I'm going to duplicate them, and I'm going to have quite a few, so I don't want there to be so many that it causes me an issue, that I have to unwrap dozens and dozens of beams when I could have just unwrapped it now. Okay, so let's go back to modeling and press Alt H to unhide, and now I want to move this 3 meters in this direction. So I'm going to select it and hit L, and then Shift and D, and then right click to put it back where it started, and then G, and I'm going to move that 3 meters in that direction. And that's perfect. So I've got one on one side, one on the other. All I want really is a couple in the middle to balance it up. So let's Shift D again and right click, and I'm going to move that over the top of this piece here, and I see it's 1.04 meters, so I suspect it should be 1. Yeah, maybe perhaps a little bit more than that. I'm not bothered about being too precise now, because I think if I'm too precise, it's going to start getting a bit samey, and sometimes samey isn't good. But I need to be precise on these because I'm about to cut them up. So let's Shift D this one and right click, and then move it over to the other side of the window. There we go. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to cut these now. So I'm going to cut a line down the middle there, and the same on the other side. And then I want to select and delete the polygons. Sorry, need to be in select mode. The polygons that are outside of the room mesh. So, oh dear. So I'll select those and delete them. If I can get in close enough. There we go, and delete them. Faces. And the reason I'm doing that is when I clone this, when I make multiple copies, I want them to join up. So if I had a modifier in now of array, and let's take it off of X and put it on Y, I want them to be exact. I want them to line up and be able to join them together quite easily. And if I've left that there wouldn't be anything to weld to, and there would be overlapping polygons. So that's why we've done that. So let's delete that modifier out. There we go. And next we're going to put a beam in, a couple of support beams and another beam down the length of the room to hold the other beams up. So I will talk to you then. Okay, so let's add a couple of beams to support these beams. So we'll go into our mesh options, not mesh, sorry, add and cube, and then we're going to scale this down. So let's use the S key. Just going to bring that right down, whoops, and a little bit more. There we go. And then I'm going to move it with the G key. So if I move it in this direction, it should be 1.5 meters. So 1.5 is slightly too much, but that's okay. Let's just move it in, and then I'll move it up. And if I go into a front view, I just want to make sure it's just below there, just kind of kissing it, if you like. There we go. I think it might be a bit thick, so let's move that in, and it might be a bit not tall enough, so let's move that down. Okay, so this is great, but I don't want it to I don't want to delete anything out yet because I'm going to duplicate it. So let's grab this actually and press L, and I'm going to move it to about halfway down our model, providing I remember to press Shift D first, John. Shift D, there we go. Right click and then move. And again, 1.5, you know, we're getting arbitrary now, it's okay. So I really don't need the ends of either of these, so let's delete those. In theory, I don't need the top of that, but there might be an angle just by it where somebody sees it. But the one I definitely don't need is this one facing against the wall, so let's delete that one. There we go. Okay, so now we can put some bevels in, and I'm just going to select these two and press the L key, and then point at the other one and press the L key. There we go. And then Shift H to hide everything else, because it just makes it easier. And then I can select all of my edges around there and pop a bevel on them with Control B. Let's just set that to 3mm. That should be good. Okay, and let's just click off that to quit it. Oh, I didn't delete that end. Let's delete that end again. There we go. Delete faces. Okay, so I want to unwrap these again because I'm going to have lots of copies. Don't want to do it more than once. So let's define an edge on here. So I'm going to define one of these top edges and right click and mark as seam. And then we'll go over to the UV editing room and make sure we've got everything selected. So A, and then A in the 2D view, and then U, and unwrap. And that's okay. Just getting them unwrapped basically to start with, so I don't have to keep redefining seams and seams and seams. So let's go back to modelling. There we go. So for these two, if I just hit Alt H to unhide, I want a pillar to be supporting them. So what I'm going to do is select both of these and press Shift and D, and then right click, and then we'll press the scale key, and I'm going to scale them down, oops, to a reasonable size, something like that I think. And then we'll use extrude and bring it down until it hits the floor. Actually, I've stopped, so it will do it again now. So I'll just hit G rather and pop that down. Because scale is correct, we should be able to just press 0 in the global transforms there, and that should do the job. Okay, so I don't want that in front of the window. That would be a bit mad, but I do want it under a beam. So I'm just going to point at one of those and press L, and the same on the other one, and then we need to move them 1.5 meters ish this way. So 1.5, there we go. And now we need to cut it in half and copy it to the other end. So let's copy it to the other end first. And yeah, I'm in a sticky position now because I've really got to unwrap everything before I do anything. So let's select those and delete them because I don't need them, and then I'll select both these, so L and L, and Shift H. I'm going to define a seam, so let's define that one. So right click and mark as seam, and then of course let's bevel just before I forget. Control B, click in. I'm going to make it 2 millimeters this time, and then click off. Let's make sure that seam hasn't split into multiples. So it has. Okay, so I only need one of those as a seam, so I'm going to select that one, right click and clear seam. There we go. Now we can go back to our UV editing room, select A and A in the 2D view, and right click and unwrap, or U and unwrap, whichever works best for you. Okay, so that's those. And what did we want to do? We wanted to copy them to the other side. So let's go to modeling and press Alt H to J. Alt, whoops, that's Control, that's why it's not working. There we go. So let's select those and hit L, then point at the other one and hit L, and then Shift D, and then right click to put them where they need to be, and then move them to the other side. It should be -3 meters, and now we just need to cut them in half. Now because my scaling is slightly off, or might be slightly off, this is where it gets a bit sticky, and this is why I'm quite precise with scales a lot of the time. So let's go to a cut there, and I think that's actually correct. What happened there? Oh, I don't have a back on that one, that's why. I do have a back on this one though. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. And now we'll do the other end. There we go. And then go back to select mode. Let's select this end and press Control and plus on the num key a couple of times until it selects up to half, and I'll delete those. Do the same here, Control plus, plus and plus, delete and faces, and then we'll do both these at the same time. So Control plus plus plus, whoops, and then delete. There we go. So now we've got some beams either side, which is going to hold the whole thing up, which is terrific. We want something to hold things up. Okay, so this is fundamentally the basics. We've built a little structure and now we're going to expand it out. But before we do that, as we've done with some of the beams, we're going to do some UV mapping first. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so let's start UVing this, and I'm going to do a bit at a time. I'm going to do a material at the same time. So I've selected the floor and I've gone to the material tab. I'm going to create a first material, which is our default. So this is the basic material, which may end up not being used at all, and then we'll create another one called floor. So with floor selected, I'm going to make sure I've got my polygons selected, and then I'm going to hit assign. And just to make sure it works, because I get a bit confused sometimes, I click off and then hit select on the floor material and it will pick them. So if we nip over to the UV room now, if you select everything and then press U and unwrap, and that should unwrap it and pack it into the UV space, giving me a little bit of border around it. If your UVs don't look like my UVs initially, it's because I made a mistake. And I've unwrapped this once or twice before and I haven't got back to my pre-unwrapped area. Okay, so let's do the ceiling now. So let's create a new material and call it ceiling. And with that selected and our polygon selected, I'll hit assign. I'll click off and just hit select to make sure it worked. In the UV view, I'll hit A to make sure everything's selected, and then U and unwrap. There we go. And quite often when I'm doing this, I'll hide things as I go so that I can see what I've got left to UV. So if I select both those, I'll hit H sorry, yeah, H. I don't know what I hit there. It wasn't H, obviously. So I hit H in the end, and that worked. And now I'm going to do the brick faces. So let's select those, and we'll create a new material called brick. And assign it, and again to confirm, click off and select, and then over here with everything selected we'll hit U and unwrap. There we go. And then H to hide. So all of the beams, I'd like to have all of those selected. I'm going to go into transparency or X-ray mode there, just to make sure I can select all of them. There we go. There seems to be one missing. I don't know what this one is. I know it's a beam, and I know it's there somewhere. So let's just select everything to start with. And on the mesh tab, we'll do a clean up and merge by distance. It's removed one vertex. Let's increase that up a little bit. No, that's too much now. Okay, so because I want to track down that one because it's bugging me, I'm going to go back into normal mode and start selecting polygons until I get one that's coming across at the top, and it's that one. So if I hit L, let's just move it here. Oh, it's fine. I have noticed one thing, and that's in my cleanup. I've managed to I've managed to weld it to the end. So yeah, be careful of that. You see, it's pulling down the ends. So just press Y with that selected, and that will fix that up. And I just want to make sure that this one isn't the same now. It is. So let's hit Y on that one, and that should do the job. There. Okay, so let's go back to X-ray mode, select over those and those ones, and we'll hit A over here twice in that case, and right click and unwrap. And I want all these pointing in the same direction. Because when we texture it, the grain is all gonna go along the length of the beam or support. So let's just select these ones and rotate them round. If you hold down Control, it will start to snap, and just get it to vertical and then click, and then click off and A, and then we'll go to UV and pack again. There we go. Might now have a little bit too much in the way of margin on our packing here, so let's just take that down to 0.03. That will give us a little extra texture room to take advantage of. Okay, I haven't created a material for these, so let's create a material, and we'll call it beams. With that selected, I'll hit assign, and then click off and just hit select, make sure. Yep, there we go. Now I can hit H. Excuse me. It's only a smoker's cough. So, I'm going to select my panes of glass here, and we'll create a new material. Call it glass. And assign, click off, select, there we go. Select everything over here, U, and unwrap. Again, it would be better if all of these were pointing in the same direction. So they're pointing up, I don't think they are. So let's rotate those round, hit Control to snap, and then UV and pack. Oops, with everything selected, of course. There we go. So we can hide those now. And H. So I want to do the outer bit of the window frame. Let's turn off this transparent mode. So Alt and click on there. But there's also some outside of that, so I'm going to change my method here. I'm going to select the vertices on the corner and press full stop to get in close, and then go to poly mode and Alt click around there. So now I can use Control plus 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 to select the rest of those. Okay, so what I want to do here is sort of unwrap these separately. I can't unwrap them as they are because they're all kind of joined together. So if I press A over here and unwrap, for example, so U and unwrap, you'll see it, you know, goes a bit nuts. But that's okay, because now I just want to select the top and the bottom and unwrap that. So U and unwrap, and nothing happens because it's selected everything. But that's okay, it's straightforward enough. All we need to do is define some seams on this. So I'm going to select this edge here and press Alt and click, and right click and mark as seam. I'll do the same on the bottom one. Right click, mark seam, Alt, right click, mark seam, and Alt, left click. Sorry, I keep saying right click. That's my fault. I do apologise. So now I can select this and we should be good. In fact, I can select all of this and unwrap it, and some of it will be a mess and some of it won't. So if I hit A over here and A in the 2D view, hit U and unwrap, these pieces are all going to come out right, including the bit of window frame that's on there, and then these ones need some attention. So let's go into that corner again with our vertex zoom trick. So Alt click near the edge there, and then Control numpad plus plus plus, and that's just the wall pieces. So we'll assign those a new zone. So let's give it a new material, and we'll call it, I don't know, brick depth. Then we'll assign it, click off, select, there we go. And I can pack these now and then hide them. And now I'm left with just the window frame, and this should be fairly straightforward. So we've unwrapped some of it anyway, so if I hit A, these pieces are already unwrapped. They're good, so I can select each of those pieces with the L key and hide them. These pieces, or these other pieces, inner pieces rather, if I press Shift H there to unhide those. If I go into mirror mode, X-ray mode, and select over these horizontal pieces, I can unwrap these in isolation. So right click, press A over here, right click and unwrap, and then hide, and now I need the vertical pieces. So if I middle mouse over those, press A over here, right click and unwrap. And before I go much further, I'm just going to select all of that and create a new material and call it window frame. There we go. And then assign, click off, select, there we go. Now Alt H to unhide everything else. Now the only thing that hasn't got a material is this bit of window frame outside. So let's turn X-ray off, and if you recall we had a default, and if we select that and select on there, it will select them because they're on the default material. There's anything left on it. So I'm going to select those and then assign them to the window frame, and then click off and then select. It would help if I was on the right thing. There we go, that's good. Okay, so we've more or less UV mapped. I've just got to pack, I think, perhaps the window frame. So let's press A to select everything and pack that. There we go. And I think everything else is fine. So that's good. So we've got it all UV mapped, and I know that's a really tedious bit, and that took a really long time with a lot of fumbling from me. I'm sorry about that. But it's important, because if we don't do it now, we're going to have to do it umpteen other times throughout the process. And yeah, I really don't like redoing things. Okay, so in the next one, we're going to get to the point where we're actually going to multiply this out and make a room out of it. So I shall talk to you then. Okay, so I'm just going to fix a potential issue, and that's because we've got some vertices that are lining up exactly here, and I don't want there to be any weld issues. So I'm going to select both these poles or supports and just do them in a little bit to give it a little bit of margin, and the same on the ones against the wall. So I'm going to select those two and then use Control plus and plus, and that will select a few, select the bevel that we've created, and then hit G and move that inwards a bit. There we go. Now I shouldn't have any welding issues where things weld to things that I don't want them to. Okay, so now on the modifiers tab, I'm going to add an array modifier, and I'm going to set the X factor to 0 and the Y factor to 1, and that, if I hit merge, should create us one deep, as it were. So if I increase that maybe to 6, I now have a nice kind of long room with lots of windows and lots of beams and all sorts, and it only took us, you know, creating one piece, even though I made a meal of creating it, to do that. Okay, so once you've done that, we'll go back to object mode, and we'll collapse that by applying it, and then just to check on our welds, we'll go back into edit mode, and if I select this top one and hit L, it should select everything linked to it, and everything's linked. So the ones that might not be are these. So let's hit L. No, they're linked, they're linked, everything's linked, everything's perfect. And you'll notice that our UV here is overlapping, and you know, that's a bit of a technique, because it's going to use the same piece of UV on each piece of wood, so I'm going to get more texture density out of that, even though it's going to be a kind of repeating pattern, but that's something we can get round with a shader. Okay, so that's that. What we also need to do is kind of move everything away, so let me press A couple of times to select everything, and I'm going to move that over to the center. So that should be 1.5, half of our 3 meters, and now we want to mirror it, which we'll do in the next one. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, before I mirror this, I'm just going to block up the ends. So I'm just going to select on a polygon on the wall and hit the L key to select all the linked polygons, and then press Shift H to hide everything else. And what we're going to do is use our edge tools to select this edge here, or those edges there rather, and whoops, these ones here as well. And we know it's 1.5 meters, so we use our extrude and bring that out 1.5 meters, preferably without messing it up too much. So -1.5. That doesn't seem like, oh no, it's not 1.5, is it? It's 3. -3. There we go. and I've managed to knock it off Y and X, so let's put those back again, and there we go. Now for these ones I just need to weld up the top, so I'm going to select, let's go into mirror mode, X-ray mode, I keep calling it mirror, I don't know why. Select those and go to mesh, clean up and merge by distance, and it should be about 4. Yes, not about 4, it should be 4, so that's good. Okay, so now we've got a couple of ends which we can do a very quick UV on. Let's make sure I'm in edit mode. I am in edit mode. I can't select it because I'm in X-ray mode. Ah, goodness, brain. Old man brain, never get it. There we go. So let's just quickly unwrap those. UV editing and unwrap. Unwrap. There we go. This isn't going to be my final UV map. I'm just getting things into the right kind of areas and the right kind of shapes. So let's make sure that's assigned to brick. Is lovely. Okay, so sorry about that. Now we need to apply our mirror modifier. So let's Alt H to unhide everything, and in our modifiers tab we'll add a mirror, and now we've got a completely sealed box which I can go inside of and have a look at. So there we are, we have kind of a repeating architectural kind of pattern, nice little thing, and you know, we just need to add some clutter and noise to it to break it up and give it some character. I'm not going to do that in this one because I've already rattled on too long, but that's the essential process. You make a small piece, you multiply it out, and you know, you get a room with not too much effort. And you know, the fancier you make it, the more time you've essentially save, if that makes sense. I hope it does. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I will talk to you in another session.